by water and the word. From heaven he came and sought her to be his holy bride. With his own blood he bought her, and for her life he died. Mid toil and tribulation and tumult of a war, she waits the consummation of peace forevermore. Till with the vision glorious, her longing eyes are blessed. That great church victorious, she'll be the church of rest. Oh, happy ones and holy, Lord, give us grace that we like the meek and lowly lead. On high may dwell with thee. Yeah, they're past the border mountains, wearing sweet bells that bind right with thee by.
Right.
All right, I think we got you. We have Michael Foster and Jesper. Michael, we are live here with hashtag Save the PCA. Ask me anything. Michael, we literally just got you on the stream, so before we started, so we're glad you're here.
Yep.
Why don't you guys both introduce yourselves, and then I'll explain. I'll explain how we're going to do this tonight, and we can jump on, and as people join us, we'll take questions, but we're going to just talk about the data. And so, Michael, you can introduce yourself. Probably most people know you, and then we'll let Jesper introduce himself.
Sure. I'm a pastor of a independent Reformed church here in Batavia, Ohio, which is just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm about 35, 40 minutes from downtown. Me and my wife Emily have been married for 22 years. I've got 8 kids, more chickens than I can reasonably justify. Yeah, that's me. I got a Twitter that I screw around on, and that's me in a nutshell.
Perfect. Jesper.
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Jesper Jensen. I'm a poster. I'm a big fan of what Foster's doing, and I'm someone who got involved because it's just it pertains to. I just have the ability to help in ways that allow Foster to focus on more important things.
Cool. So we're glad to have you. And in case anyone's wondering, both Michael and myself are teaching elders in the PCA. So we can take relevant action in the PCA. We are not just outsiders. We are not throwing stones. We live in the house, everybody. Michael, are you ready? Not Pastor Michael, not Michael Foster. Michael Bowman, are you ready for us to talk about this tonight? Are you happy to be here?
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm very happy to be here. I don't know if you see my background this time. I did set up a Velvet Elvis, little Velvet Elvis in the background. I thought, I'm just wondering if maybe the PCA should be more like a trampoline than a brick wall, if anyone gets that reference.
and he said in the chat, so I'll let everybody know.
And it's a joke.
It is on sale, so I'm sure everyone is.
It is on sale. It's pretty beat up, admittedly. It's seen better days, but you would make my aunt happy if you wanted to buy it.
And so we'll have people join us on X and on YouTube, but we are here. So if you jump into the live chat, you can ask Jesper and Michael, the people who have put a bunch of the work into the Save the PCA report, questions. We have some that I already have to work through, and we'll just take questions as they come through. But we're happy to be here. Go ahead.
Well, I should say, Matt, before we get started, what I just said was a joke. The last time I kind of started off with trying a joke, and I ended up in somebody's email about how I think the PCA is completely over. I was just doing a meme, everybody. I was just trying to. I maybe did a bad job, but I was just trying to do a meme. So Save your emails this time.
Let me be clear, and I'm not joking. Only Michael Bowman is the only villain here. Only villain. So if you want to villainize someone, it's him. But we're here because we are going to discuss the data from the Save the PCA report, and we have questions about it. Because I do think the data is important. I do think it is useful to elders in the PCA. That is the primary audience, and members, of course. And so there have been questions about it. And so we have some positive questions, some negative questions. We want to work through it. I have the ability in my ugly looking bunker to pull up the data, and we can look through any parts that are relevant here. So before we start, there was a very interesting, a question that I got a few times. And so I'm sorry, we're not going to start off on a nice foot, but we'll work our way back to one. It's for both Jesper and Michael Foster, but especially for you, Foster. Michael Foster, you aren't even in the PCA. Come on. Why do you care? What are you doing with this? And then Jesper, you can answer why you care about this, why you want to get involved. Neither of you are elders, and it was kind of how the question was phrased, but we'll let you guys answer.
Well, I've written 2 posts. At the beginning of both posts, I stated why, and I've done 2 long spaces, one of which was listened to by 3,500 people, and I stated why on both of those posts. So if the people read any of that stuff, they made it through the first couple paragraphs, they should know the answer to that question. Number one is it is the duty of elders, according to even the doctrine taught in the Book of Church Order, to have a concern for the church generally, and to speak to it as the Lord allows. So PCA church elders do that all the time. But I think that the Reformed world in America is downstream from the PCA largely. That I think it's the premier conservative Reformed denomination. It's a feeder for a lot of the other smaller Presbyterian churches, and a lot of PCA trained people end up as elders and non-denoms or independent reforms, or even Reformed Baptist churches in some circumstances, depending where the Lord calls them to in this country. So I think as the PCA goes, to some degree, so goes the Reformed Christian movement in America. And, when I've broken down the side of the road before and people pulled over in their car and helped me, very thankful for that. Never once did I look at them and say, what is your problem? Why are you helping me with my broken down car?
Yeah. Jesper, what about you?
To mirror basically what Foster is saying, I think the PCA is from a greater Christendom perspective, a strategically important denomination. Not only is it Reformed, it's arguably the largest Reformed church in America and therefore the world. And it will be very hard for Christians to maintain a level of influence on a culture that is shifting away from Christianity if the PCA were to wither into a sort of a liberal morass, if it may. As you see with what has happened to the PCUSA, it went from 30% decades ago of the U.S. was or some sort of mainline evangelical denominations. They made up 30% of the U.S. population. Now they're less than 8%, and that's a real problem. Basically, totally culturally annihilated, have no influence over the culture whatsoever. They can't push the Christianity. As a matter of fact, they're pushing anti-Christianity. And I think Christendom will really suffer if the PCA goes the same direction. So that's why I'm doing it.
That's great. Michael Bowman, why did you either threaten or promise, we'll see, depending on how someone takes it, to talk about this with me with different people every month here leading up to the General Assembly of the PCA?
So you're the one who did that. I want to make it clear. You're putting that on me. You're said that we were going to do that every month.
You're the bad guy.
I said it sounds great. Listen, we're always talking about these sorts of things. And one of the actually beautiful things about Presbyterianism is that it's supposed to be something that is public. It's very open. It's not like there's all of these secret rules. There's not supposed to be all of these secret rules, hidden where nobody can find them. Something I love right now, we have a membership class, and something that I love to tell everybody in the new members class is everything we believe is public and clear. I can point you to our polity in our book of church order. You might not understand it. You may need help understanding it, but it's right there. What we believe theologically is right there in the Westminster Standards. It's all there for everybody to see. And the beauty of that is that, this is what we're supposed to be about, right? We don't go about with secret, underhanded ways, but rather through the open statement of the truth, we commend ourselves to others. And so that's why I think it's beneficial for us to do this. Also, it is important because there's a lot of people, even in talking to some over the last month, who just didn't realize what was going on in parts of the PCA.
Right.
Didn't realize some of this was so prevalent. Some of these ideas were so common. Even if it's not a majority of the church, it's still far bigger and far more of a problem than many of us thought. And so it seems very worth it. We had so far 1,300 people on the last, video, our last live stream, have watched it on YouTube anyway. And so evidently for us, that's big, right? Like that means that struck a nerve and there are people watching. And I know some of them are writing about us as the bad guys. I've seen those screenshots, but I also think probably the majority of it is people who are like, whoa, what's going on? Active members and elders in the church that are trying to figure out what's going on and what they can do. And so that makes it a valuable and important thing to do.
Because let me speak as one of the people who didn't know what was going on. I'm from Wisconsin. I joined the PCA because of my convictions and confession with a desire to help plant Reformed churches. I just wanted to plant churches and drink beer with my friends in Wisconsin. That was the life goal. And nobody told me about some of these things going on until I started seeing things on X, these things, this report. And so my original reaction was I actually didn't care if Michael Foster, if Jesper, if whoever at the beginning, everyone said, oh, it's just a group of an Anon army trying to destroy us. I actually didn't care who they were. I didn't care who they were because they told me something I didn't know that nobody else told me. And so I wanted to act. And so that's why I am happy to talk about this. And I have found that, yes, as I've begun to talk to others, there isn't a large understanding. And so I do think getting the data into a way where people can understand it and people can grasp it is one of the best things we can begin to do. And so I want to go to some of the most major findings, and then we'll ask a few questions about it, because I do think, let me just pull up this section that I'll have us look at, and I'll share my screen and we can all see this section. And so the findings here, and I'll read these two paragraphs, and the second paragraph is the one I want to focus on. We'll work through it. Then we'll ask where they gathered the data. If they just gathered all this erroneous data was another big question. So most of our research was conducted via the PCA Church Directory, made publicly available by the PCA Administrative Committee. We worked on a version that was updated on September 18th, 2025. Of the 1,964 churches in the directory, only 78% of these churches had websites we could survey. Those that we could not survey either had a foreign language website, typically Korean, a broken website, or no website altogether. 16% of the functional English websites had a combination of no elders, no deacons, and no other relevant roles listed. These websites were evaluated as having no functional female officers. So here's the findings that we want to talk about. Of the websites surveyed, 4% of them listed had one or more women that we identified as a functional female officer. 6% of them listed had one or more women that we identified as a functional female deacon. In total, 9.5% of the churches had some form of functional female officer. And this website, the data was updated on 10/31, so on Halloween or Reformation Day, depending on what you want to call it. So, guys, here's the questions we need to answer as we go forward. For you guys, can you define functional female elder for us? Define functional female deacon, and then we'll kind of talk about where you got that information. And so either one or both of you can tell us about that.
Jesper, you have a pull up the follow-up page on there, Matt. Jesper, yep. we put some sort of definition on there.
Yeah, we were asked right away because, I mean, at some level, it's a fair question. What do you mean when you say functional female officer?
Yep.
Now, granted, we provided a loose definition of it in the original report, but there's a more extensive definition. And this was made available, let's see.
Yeah, I'm pulling up. So they can, again, if a person wants to read more about this, you can go to the follow-up on the functional female officer report. And so then we have, what is a functional female officer? And so I wonder if I can zoom in for you. Does that make it any better for you guys? Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Yeah, I see it.
Great. Jesper, why don't you tell us about the definition, whether you want to just list things from this or for especially as this will go out on audio later.
Yeah, well, I guess since this is an audio recording, I can go ahead and read it. A functional female officer, for the purposes of the report, is a named role where a woman participates in one or more functions typically reserved for the elders and or deacons and undergoes some form of a commissioning, quote unquote, or ordaining process. This term is used to point out that if a non-ordained role, parentheses, only in the sense that the people doing it don't call it ordination because many of these roles are examined, voted on, and installed, close parentheses, is performing the tasks of an officer and is initiated in a way an officer would be in all but name. That's functionally a female officer. Granted, functional female officer is a batching term referring to both functional female elders and functional female deacons. For the purposes of the report, we refer to both, but the data partitions them. This is part of why in the bucketed data, deaconess is so much larger than any other group.
Yeah. So that means what we're talking about, and I think it's important because I think this is still not understood. You guys are not just referring to titles. Titles are part of this, the things people understand, the title deaconess or shepherdess, but you're also describing where roles are described, where functions are described, where actions are described that would be understood as limited to an ordained officer, right? Both of these things. Tell me about what that. Oh, Michael, you are muted.
Sorry, I was.
Yeah, you're good.
A boomer moment there, even though I'm not. So, nonetheless, we're not just talking about lay leaders that are selected and just appointed to doing something on off occasions. We're talking about people who are going through a process that mirrors very closely the ordination process, right? They have to be nominated by the congregation in some way, sometimes just by the elders, but they are voted on, in some cases have a candidate phase, and then they're installed, have an installation service where they take vows in front of people to operate in a representative way, right? So an officer is a representative position in the church that represents God to the people, people to God, and serving them, not sacerdotal, but nonetheless, it's ministerial and declarative. And so we have people that are operating that. Now, if you just did that with a guy, people would start to say, directors don't go through that entire process, right?
They're treated as staff. They can be hired, they're fired, right?
Directors, have a pretty, in a lot of PCA churches, a pretty significant role. I was the director for a time of outreach and evangelism at a church. And But these are folks that are undergoing this entire process, and they are also sitting on the boards, sometimes once a quarter, sometimes every single board meeting, right? Whether it's the session or the diaconate, and they're given titles that confirm some sort of official position with the church. So in every way, this is getting us close to mirroring what a deacon or elder does, but it's with women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the function here is they're functioning as a representative of not just sometimes the women, right? And I would just say that pastors and deacons are pastors and deacons of the entire church, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both
right.
men and women, poor, rich, whatever distinctions. If they belong to Christ Church, those are they're there to serve them. But sometimes it's really speaking to the overall well-being of the church. In some extreme cases, like the cases of Brookhaven Presbyterian, pastored by Zach Bradley, the women, their desire at Brookhaven, according to their own published letter, is that this women's council that they have could actually veto a decision made by their session. If they and so basically the women's council is a board that can appeal elder ruling through the senior pastor, and the senior pastor wants to have it set where if they're against it, that will basically revoke it and put it back into deliberation on that, right? So in that case, that's actually more than being even equal to the elders. In that case, they actually have the power to veto.
Right. It's a super
elders, right.
Yeah.
So you're seeing
it's authority.
Yeah. So you're seeing all these components out there, some more concentrated in one church than others, right? But they're all out there. And we're saying, look, these are representative, increasingly authoritative positions within the church that are being housed by women or being staffed by women, however you want to put that. And
being manned by women, is that?
Yeah. Some sort of irony there, I suppose. But the point I'm trying to get across is simply like we felt like functional female officers was probably the best catchphrase we could come up with to summarize what is happening. And it's coming through multiple pathologies, some of which is them trying to find ways to minister and help women, because the church is really large. So this is pretty common in larger PCA churches, some form of this. So that's more of a pragmatic sort of approach. Others, I think, are influenced directly by a willful egalitarianism as opposed to a pragmatical sort of egalitarianism. And some are coming from some really non-reformed views of ecclesiology, where you have to have this alongside care provided by a specific representative board that can help women through feminine crisis, so.
Yeah. Because again, I think that we see, there are two things, right? One, the reason this is a problem is, again, as the Bible teaches and as Presbyterians believe, all power and authority in the church that Jesus works is done through the officers, elders, and deacons. And so when authority, when these things are done through others, this is them taking the functions of an officer. And so there are cases where people are given the titles of officers, which the PCA Book of Church Order does not allow. And there are places where they're doing actions or exercising authority of the officers, and if it's been delegated or abdicated to them, right? If you have veto over the session, or if, for example, we say ordination is an act of laying on of hands, right, by elders, and if you have other non-ordained people and obviously women doing that, you are taking on a function described as an elder. And so we obviously want the problem to be clear that it is both titles, shepherdess, deaconess, the other things, and functions. And it's both. And it's just funny to me that, again, one of the things we're going to get as we, not tonight, but as we talk about this, people are going to say, oh, so you're saying there's no place for an elder to ask a wise older woman to step into a woman's life. And I just don't know how you ask that question in good faith when I say, how is that the same thing as a group of elected women having veto power over the elder session? I don't even understand. Like, that's not a good faith question, really.
I think there's no way for some of these questions. Like, people say, well, don't you think that elders should listen to the older, wiser women in their church? I would assume they are, right? Yeah. Like, how they get. So, are you saying that elders don't listen to the older, wiser women in their church? Like, I mean, first off, and then they'll act like elders don't know how to talk to women. I thought these are men that rule their household well, that they're one woman man. Did you not investigate this? Like, women they're not that mysterious. And so, you know, when people I consult women in my church about things. So if there's something's going on, there's several women I'd call and say, what's your thoughts on this? What's the word on the street, you know? And my wife is very involved in the lives of the women. We believe in Titus 2, but Titus 2 is deploying the older women of the church in a very organic way. You can lay some level of organization on it, but it really is, you know, sort of, here's how. It's more of an apprenticeship is what you're seeing described there than like classroom. I always think it's hilarious when you see RTS talking about raising up Titus 2 women by taking MDiv-ish like classes. I'm like, well, don't really recall that part in Titus 2. And then they'll say, well, are you saying women don't need to know theology? And I'm saying, no, I don't think so. But how are you going to claim that's what Titus 2 is talking about, like proper systematic theology or something? It's very practical and focused on that. So I just, there's a lot of dishonesty here, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it's coming from multiple places, multiple motives, and sort of goals that they're trying to accomplish. So we are trying to speak broad enough to capture a move that's happening, right? And specific enough that we can start to speak to it and start to deal with the various threads of it.
Jesper, do you have something you want to add to that? Or you can also add if there are specific common examples of this that come up in the data, right? Types of this that people might want to be aware of. Do you have something to add, though?
Yeah. So in like when people, the common things like, oh, you don't want to get women's input. And I think it's important that we make the distinction. It's been helpful for me, at least, to distinguish between women's input and women's supervision, because it's one thing to consult a woman as needed for an issue that pertains to women or any issue in particular, but to install essentially a parallel board, which is to be present at all meetings and to always provide their input, and on some level is going to influence the votes. That's supervision. And who supervises? Does a leader supervise, or does a subservient supervise? And I guess that sort of answers the question, because the word super in and of itself kind of reveals the nature of the hierarchy. So even if you aren't getting a vote, just by having a permanent presence, it implies on some level that supervision of women is required over the elders. Yeah. And I just don't think that's really in line with the Lord's plan for church hierarchy.
Right. Women need pastors too, as we say on this show. We had a woman, she's a Presbyterian minister's wife in Australia, and she wrote an article that I found very interesting. And one thing she said is, it's very different for you to want your voice to be heard and to be in charge. And that is a distinction people are kind of refusing to make in terms of this. So tell us about, and we'll come back to a few of these other examples, but tell us about how you began to gather this data, because then we're going to ask about either errors or if this has all just been doxing, and if this is, because that was, again, that's the other big criticism of this. So how did you guys begin gathering the data? And then we'll get to, Jesper, how you guys have refined it over time, because you told us a little bit about that before we went live, and I think it's actually really useful and helpful for people to know that.
I'll say for me, I started a version of this report way back in 2018 called Women in Leadership in the PCA, just for my own study. I thought, I still believe that revoice is downstream from egalitarianism and downstream from stuff like this. I think we all would agree that that's even more disordered than it's another level of against nature, right? Mm-hmm. But so I started just going through presbytery by presbytery, looking at church websites, and found that first off, like a huge portion of the staff in the PCA is female. So you always hear like, well, we need to have more female representation. It's pretty intense already, even working within deacon assistants and directors. But that's where I saw lots of shepherdess, like significant, like more than you would think, I guess is probably, what I would say, enough to be concerned. So I started working on that report way back then, and then just kind of shelved it for a long time. And then when Charlie Kirk got martyred, I was like, if I'm going to go into the PCA, I want to make sure that we're allowed to talk about things like this seriously. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life playing footsie with progressives. I don't need them. I don't need to be liked by them. They don't make me legitimate. My attraction to the PCA is not money or credibility or anything like that. It will cost me something to go into the PCA. And that's what some of the older folks in the PCA don't understand, is that with the younger group, their name is mud, right? I'll have to defend like, no, it's not all a bunch of leftists. So it's not all, and I've been very clear that I don't think that's the case online. For me, it's out of a belief that institutions matter. I think it's while not a perfect Presbyterian denomination, and lots of like good reform needs to happen, even in structure, I think long terms. I think I'm a Presbyterian. I see it in scripture. I'd like to be part of a Presbyterian denomination again. So I wanted to know that if I'm going to go in, that we're allowed to pursue the peace and purity of the church, first through biblical admonition of talking about this stuff. This is public information. This is not secret. I got all sorts of secret information. I got your group chats, guys. I've seen all that stuff. You want some juicy stuff, spicy stuff. I'm not sharing that stuff. But I know about that. It's public information, and wanted to know we could talk about it. So then I just started dropping it. Like everyone's like, where do you find time for this? I don't know. Do people know how screen recordings work or how screenshots work? Like, it doesn't take very long, but you didn't have to look that deep. And plus I had the old document I was working from. So I'm doing that, and it starts to capture some attention. And I think the variety of presbyteries and number of churches were taking people by surprise, right? How it was like lots of presbyteries. And then Jesper had started working on a much superior database than I had. And I was like, well, why recreate the wheel if you got something that's come alongside that's doing a better job? And we had some other folks that had interest in the project jump on board. And Jesper can be a little more exact about this, but in a matter of a little over a week, we had managed to go through all the public websites of the PCA and capture information from there, just manually. We didn't use AI to do this or anything like that. We just went and looked, and I'm sure there were like data entry errors on a few places or whatever. Like someone was like, there's just one guy online. Oh man. Anyway, he's like, I'm a professional data engineer or something like that. And you know what, dude? I'm not a professional data engineer. Like, I don't recall ever saying like, hey, we're experts in data engineering or anything like that. Our information is irrevocable. You know, I'm just listening to that like, oh, good for you. I don't kind of think that's true, but whatever. Like, here's what I am. I'm doing what a person would do. If you want to go find a church, what do? You go look at their website and their social media. I'm doing what a person would do. And I go look at the church, the way the church has decided to represent itself to the world, right? This is who we are. This is who we want you to think who we are. So I go there and look at their website, and I look at their social media, and what do I find? Right? Well, I find these things and document it. You know, that's not doxing. You know, there's one guy literally that came on the space complaining about the traffic we sent to his website. Like, well, you put me on blast. Well, so what? Isn't that good? You want some more traffic? Don't you want more people to find out about your glorious doctrine? Or you got something to hide? You know, you guys want to send more traffic my way? Send it my way. I'm fine with that. You know, so that's how I got into it. And that's how Jesper got in. And I think if you want to take it from there, Jesper.
Yeah. So I stumbled upon Foster's work. I'm not particularly like plugged into the online PCA world, or at least I wasn't at the time, but I saw what he was doing and I was like, oh, I mean, I've had some experience in online spaces, and typically these people, part of why they were posting it publicly is that fundamentally they don't believe they're doing anything wrong. And two, they don't think anyone's going to try to stop them. Well, number two was now the case because Foster was showing people, and I know, oh, they're going to start changing things up very quickly. It's going to be very hard to capture the scope of this issue. In reality, if he is just doing this alone in his spare time, it's just like working through websites one at a time. It's just not ideal, and it'll be very difficult to make this conversation substantial in the long run. So I took the entire PCA administrative committee church directory. I put it all in one place. I put in a bunch of fill in the blanks, and then I started up separate sheets saying, okay, every time we find an entry that kind of satisfies the condition of what we were calling at the time shepherdesses, right? We're going to flag it. We're going to put it in. So then I'm like, well, I'm just going to message Foster and see if he'd be interested in working this way, because I truly believed that if we did it this way, we would have a more substantial argument on our end that this is a persistent and systematic issue. And I basically explained to him, look, the PCA is small enough to where you could have a group of 5 or so guys with about an hour or so a day of logging churches. You could have this done in a week. And that is what happened. We basically said, I gave him a set of instructions saying, you scout the websites, note anything that falls into these categories. If you aren't unsure, because ultimately we did have to make judgment calls, put it in. We can refine the data set later. Where we took a safer approach initially. We did not necessarily designate every single data point as an FFO. That was a separate value that was stored on the church. And then we had the report done, and then we did our first initial cleanup, and then we ran it out. And like I said, we made it public because there was an anon by the name of Frank Capra Jr. on Twitter on February of maybe a year ago or something. I'm not sure. I know it was in February. He did something similar where he said that there was a deaconess problem, and he had a bunch of examples of it. And he was just immediately dismissed right off the bat. They said, oh, these are just anecdotal examples. Like, you're an amateur. You don't know what you're doing. And I'm like, well, that criticism will not be able to hold any water if anyone can just look at our data set and evaluate it for themselves. There's a level of accountability there on our part, because it's like, well, you can see where we're drawing our data from, how we're making our calculations and drawing our conclusions. So we did that, and yeah, I'm trying to think of what else you would want to hear, but I mean that's the basic gist of it.
So the data
make it on the report, like we have had tips and
yes,
like that we know there are more shepherdess and women's councils than are listed on the report. One reason we know that, one reason I know that, is I just went and looked at the CDM's Women's Connect on Facebook. It's public. I just went there. I went into the search and typed in shepherdess or women's council. And there's a ton of women talking about churches that have or were starting women's council. Because some of these conversations go back 7 years ago, right? A lot of it exploded in 2018 after the Women in Ministry report. And so we know that there's more churches that have them. We've seen some that have internal, I wouldn't say it's a church-wide emails that are on MailChimp that people just sent us to public links to that are referring to the Women's Council, their elder advisors, like stuff. So we know there's more, but I think one takeaway I'd say is that we were trying to be as conservative as we could be. There's so much ambiguity with how they use these words that, like, when we had care team on there, at first I was like, what? More or less telling Jesper I was concerned about listing care team on there. Well, then I went to, and he told me why, and I went and looked and saw that the women's care team was on this particular church was functioning very much like a female group of deacons.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what makes some of this really hard, is because of not using set terminology and being, I would say, needlessly crafty about how they're describing this stuff. Jesper.
Yeah. So to build on what Michael was describing there, that we had several instances where there were no visible, like, traditional church offices on the webpage, but you would have something like what's called a mercy team, and a mercy team would be comprised of men and women, and for all intents and purposes, it seemed like their job was to basically do the diaconate's job. So one way that you're able to bypass this sort of requirement about officers being male is like, well, if we just dissolve all the male-only offices and replace them with synthetic offices that don't have this requirement, well, then we're in compliance, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, there were a bunch of ambiguous things where it's just like we had no idea what it was. Like, what is a soul care director? Like, what is that? What is a soul care director? I mean, for all intents and purposes, it sounds like something a pastor ought to be doing, right? The pastor cares for the souls of his congregation, and then just like we had just all this like crazy
email directors of discipleship. We're like, what's going on there? What's that even mean? That's not included in here. We had another one where it actually had a chart where it had elders, and then it had the servant leaders. So that was the name of the team. And the chart made it like very clear. These servant leaders is a board of deacons, or like they operate.
I thought it was just going to be the complementarian husbands. I thought that's what the servant leaders were just going to be, but no, they're the deacons.
Yeah, the pack mules. But no, it, like that had men and women on it, and they called them servant leaders. And so and now we've got guys like Spanish River Church creating the entire category of gospel workers, which is a phrase that I've seen thrown around as I've kind of tracked some PCA guys I didn't know anything about. I'm recognizing that gospel worker is a category that's on the rise. And it's this men and women who can operate in such a way that they can claim ministerial benefits from the IRS, right? So not having their getting the benefits that's attached to that, okay? And they can help. They can officiate weddings, funerals, They can help in leadership development in the church. They can distribute the sacraments. They play all these very deeply entangled with the leadership of the church roles. Generally, this used to be taken care of. Like, here's what I think everyone needs to know: deacon, our deacon assistant, and director can cover all this stuff.
Right.
Like, already, all that stuff can be covered under the BCO as it stands. So why is that not good enough? What is the reason that they have to do these things? Well, I think we're seeing like there's a clear move to create. I like Jesper's got these funny phrases like synthetic. These sort of synthetic offices is what they're creating. And so this is happening throughout. And so I think our report remains extremely conservative. And we've tried to the best of our ability. I've got a family. Jesper, well, I don't know. He's mysterious. I won't say. But I have a family. I'm a bivocational pastor. I had one guy. I was going to tell you guys this. This is I had this is a ruling elder from a church down south. And he said, my concern is that it's actually, this is my motivations, like, because that's what matters most, not the information. My concern is actually for worldly acclaim or money. Now, you guys know the world loves to talk about the PCA. I mean, this is like, it is the hot jumping conversation. Like, all the kids are like, what's going on with the PCA? Oh, are you part of the PCA? Are you part of the, like, I mean, the fandom, I don't know how I can even deal with it. But,
dude, what's funny is so being up in the Midwest and not in, maybe in the South, when you're in a town where you've got all these PCA churches, you have this sense like, oh, everybody knows who we are.
Yeah.
Around here, literally no one. I mean, even people in the church are like, wait, what is this? I mean, nobody knows what the PCA is.
There's no money in this. I can tell you that much. If anything,
what are you talking about? Those sweet engagement bucks from Twitter, because you're just a rabble rouser. You're rage baiting.
I can't.
You're making tens, if not dozens of dollars.
I've learned if I want to rage bait, all I have to do is say something about Hinduism. So,
but because here's the really important. Well, let me make one statement in case someone doesn't know about Presbyterian polity, and then let me ask one follow-up about data. If you want to start asking questions in the chat, we'll ask them. I have one more question. I'll let Pastor Michael ask any questions he has, and then we'll start asking others. Obviously, the problem with these terms like gospel worker and these kinds of things is being Presbyterian means we say Jesus has told us biblically what offices and what positions of leadership he has given to the church. We are saying Jesus regulates how the church is governed. That's our thing. And right, this is why even if the BCO doesn't technically forbid it, I can't name myself CEO at my church plant. This is why I can't do it, whether it be convenient or not. And obviously, as a church planter, one of the things that is just the worst is we pray that God would send us men who can be officers in our church. And then I hear, well, we're going to dissolve our deacons so we can do, there are qualified and godly men there. No, like that's horrible. That's horrible. But because from what I understand, all the data, and again, you guys have talked about how the data is conservative, right? You've discounted plenty of things. The data is also fully transparent, right? If they wonder, what do they mean? Why did they flag this women's leadership council, this care team, right? Whatever, they can go and look at what you're talking about, right? They don't have to take my word for it or your word for it. Jesper or
every single data entry has an archive link, so you can look at the website the way it looked to us when we logged it. And I can speak a little bit to the winnowing process, because obviously the critics will be like, oh, they didn't talk about data at all and data refinement at all. So we released our first report, I believe October 4th. And the first big instance of widowing took place that week, because that's when most of the scorn was heaped onto it on Twitter. And there were some genuine like errors, because while we were making the report, we had a category that we used, and we called this category RROF, and this just stands for relevant role occupied by a female. This is basically our bucket of, we don't know what it is, but we're not necessarily confident enough in this. This is something that we should be doing. We'll just put it here. Or I guess a better way of saying it is like, is this person exercising authority over men in the church? That was basically like, we didn't know whether or not they were or weren't, but it wasn't definitive. And you weren't seeing, because I did mention this in the methodology, we were looking for terminology that was used in the book called Alongside Care, which was edited by Christina Fox. So you see things like going alongside the elders, sitting in on session meetings, being the women's collective voice. When we saw those terms, that's what made us say, okay, this is probably some form of functional female elder. So we're going to flag that. So that winnowing process, because people could contact me online using the contact form, and basically I got a lot of comments saying, hey, this is wrong, this is incorrect. And a lot of them, yeah, there was either genuine clerical errors. So I replied and said, look, sorry, this is the case. We really didn't mean to, like, we'll fix this and release an updated version of the data set. And then I just went through the first go around and basically anything that really wasn't within our purview, because functional female officer really is a specific thing. It's basically trying to find roles, named roles women are occupying, that sort of occupy the roles of the elder or the deacon. Not like basically director of finance, like church administrators. These are not things that we are trying to flag or say are unbiblical. Like, there is a place for that, obviously. So we went ahead and just all of that removed from the data. Now, granted, there were some cases that it was worth keeping them in. There was an example of an administrator who was placed into the diaconate. That you had a subject header, like this is the diaconate, and you had all the men, and then you had a female just labeled administrator. That's kind of curious. Would you agree? Like, that's atypical. So when there was substantive atypicalness to an instance, we believed it was warranted to keep it in the data set. And basically, we started with around 1,000 or so instance entries, I believe, maybe just shy of that, around 900. And a lot of the data now, I mean, because the most recent version of the data set, I just went ahead and partitioned everything that wasn't officially designated as an FFO within the church into a whole entirely different table. And I just labeled this table ambiguous data. So now there should be a pretty clear like correlation between the raw data and data where we felt like should be included, but it wasn't substantial enough to basically warrant being flagged.
Yeah.
And we're at, let's see here, basically around 800 with around 180 ambiguous entries. And like I said, we started with 1,000. So all the hubbub, all the kvetching online was basically over around roughly 20 entries that were present in the raw data,
right,
which were all removed within the first week. And they were never labeled as FFOs in the documentation.
What's so funny about this is how I actually first got in touch with Jesper and Michael was I saw this data. I saw it come out. I went in and I, of course, said, I need to look and find out if there are people I know that I might need to call and ask what they mean. I need to find out. I need to work towards the peace and purity of the church myself. I need to check this to find if it's accurate. And I found something. I went and looked it up and I said, oh, this looks like it's an error. And I contacted them and I was immediately contacted. And Jesper said, oh, it looks like you're right. This is listing something else. It must have just whatever. We'll look into it and fix it. And they did. And I was like, oh, I guess they just care about it being accurate. And obviously this question, and I'm not even going to waste time with it because it's already been answered. This isn't about a overly specific, narrow, exactly how every church has to run. Everything about directors, all of these things have been discounted in the terms of liberty, potential liberty of Christians. Some of these things might be in potential violation. They might be problematic, but this is operating with charity over all of these things, in focusing on a very specific set of things, which I think is very important and very helpful for anyone who wants to look at the data. The other question that I think we should ask is, and someone asked about overtures here, but we were asked, we've been asked in various forms, like, what are the specific goals? What is the specific way this can be worked out, right? And so obviously someone mentioned overtures in our chat, and we've been asked about it before. But how would you guys want to answer that question? And I'll ask the other teaching elder in the PCA after you guys answer what his thought on this would be as well.
Yeah, I'll hop on. So first is just awareness. I've said this from the get-go that I think a lot of the best men in the PCA who are serving as teaching or ruling elders are just busy with the work of the church, and they're not tracking all this sort of stuff. And they would assume that a lot of it's not as widespread as it is. I think we kind of see that with Revoice, right? That with Revoice, it was gaining ground and legitimacy. And then finally the ruling elders realized just how it was. And they showed up at I believe it was the 2021 GA and said, nope, no more of that, right? There's more ruling elders at that GA than there ever have been, or had been in years anyhow. So I think part of what we're trying to do is just let people know this is going on, make them aware of it, have these conversations within their own presbytery, call the guys up like you did. And if you're sitting on a credential committee, knowing to ask these sort of questions, or even if you're just a member during an exam in presbytery, if you want to make friends, I suppose, you can ask this from the floor of presbytery during one of those exams. So, like, first and foremost, just let people know what's going on, inform them. I think that's a real ministry. And that was our goal at kind of a basic level. And it's resulted in people sending, a lot of people sending some 40-5 letters, looking for the presbytery to inquire what's going on. Multiple of those have gone out to different presbyteries, as I've heard. So they're taking action there. I think it also means that people are going to have to do some overtures. There's some cool overtures coming, and that I've heard about, trying to tighten up loopholes. But I think PCA elders are going to have to understand that you're just going to have to call people out. Not online necessarily, that's what I'm talking about, at presbytery, to their face, right, in these meetings, and say, this is not okay. It violates our system of doctrine in this way. And because people are using words in a way that, whether their intentions don't matter, it's deceptive. Okay. Well, I don't need to look into someone's heart here. I'm going to say, that's not what that word means. That word communicates something else that's at odds with these things. People always mock, oh, so you don't think women should read scripture in the service? Well, first off, the guys that wrote the Westminster thought that, as a general. So in the larger catechism, that it's just a minister that does the reading of scripture. And if anyone else is going to do it, it would be an elder, a ruling elder, a deacon, or perhaps a man trained for the ministry, right? So I don't know why we're acting like we should be ashamed of that. What's in the larger catechism, which is part of the PCA's standards, is also reflected in the Directory of Worship, which I understand is not constitutional in the PCA, but still reflects the mindset that is also in the Directory of Worship. The idea that these women, that we have women distributing the elements, doing the pastoral prayer, doing all these things, exhortations around giving. They're getting as close as possible. You guys are going to just have to have the guts to call them out and then wrestle them to the ground and recognize you're not going to go, you got me. It was a good try, but you got me. That's not what's going to happen. Either they're being deceptive or they're very naive in what they're doing and don't understand how it's at odds. And frankly, I would take when Zach Bradley, he's a pastor, teaching elder in the PCA, hopped on our space, that one of the first spaces we did was Save the PCA. His arguments in defense of what he was doing were terrible. They were bad. They were bad historically. They were bad biblically. I legitimately felt bad for the guy. And anyone that was on there, I could have ripped that to shreds. It would have been easy. But I just let him talk. And I even at one point said, "Are you sure you want to make that argument?" To which he responded like, "I don't know, maybe not." And I was like thinking, I don't think you should be making the argument you are. I think maybe he really just doesn't know what he's saying and someone's got to confront him. Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think you got to have these talks with these guys and force them to deal with the deeper issue. This can't be Settlers of Catan. I see it up there on your bookshelf there.
We were just playing it with the kids. Yeah. Literally right before the stream.
So you can't treat this like a board game. You have to it can't all be dealt with through legalese. You're going to have real conversation, man to man, pastor to pastor, and say this is dishonest, and pressure them to fall in line. Really, people should love. They should love their standards. They should love them. And I've seen on these websites, well, the PCA doesn't allow it. No, that's not true. Scripture doesn't allow it. Right. Like, this is not a matter of, well, I belong to this franchise right now. And in this franchise, that's not allowed. Look, if you want a Big Mac, look, I love Big Macs. We don't do Big Macs here. Right. We do that. This is a Taco Bell, right? Like it's a franchise difference. This is a matter of the Word of God. And if you're not into this established tradition and stream, like, what are you doing here? Yeah. This is not a small matter.
I think we will have to, as one of the first things I said, that the solution to this is calling elders you disagree with, asking a lot of questions for clarity, and then stating your concern, your opinion, stating that this isn't just a difference in practice or ideas, that this is a biblical principle difference, and we need to have it settled. And we need to have it settled together. We need to have it settled in church courts for the peace and purity of the church. Jesper or Michael Bowman, do you want to add anything about solution? Like, what kind of solution is aimed for when it comes to this?
I can speak to it a little bit.
Sure.
Now, people act like there's some sort of malicious secret agenda for Save the PCA. It's like, I think you can intuit pretty clearly the reason we are doing this is because we want the practice to stop. And what that means can change, but fundamentally, the motivator is that we don't think this is a biblical practice, and we think it is detrimental to the health of the church, and therefore it needs to stop. And that's going to be a combination of a legal reform, and then it's going to be partly legal enforcement. Now, a lot of the people who currently want to end this practice in their own presbyteries are kind of fighting with a hand behind their back, because on some level, they're able to get away with it because it's very easy to deflect any sort of attempts to shut this down, because there really is no definitive language in the BCO as it stands. So, like I said before, these people don't actually think what they're doing is wrong. So they're going to defend their practices, and they're going to defend them however they see fit. It's not necessarily something that they can be easily caught on right now. So that's part of why overtures will come. Now, people are acting like, oh, where are the overtures? Like, the report has not even been out a full month, and most Presbyterian meetings take place once a month. Maybe exercise a little bit of patience, and don't expect us to lay out everything for you, because these things take time to develop. But yeah, fundamentally, like Foster said, this is going to require boldness on the behalf of the elders. We're going to be willing to basically say, hey, look, this isn't acceptable, and we're not going to tolerate it, because ultimately the fear, and part of what motivates Save the PCA, is that if this becomes an accepted practice, which, and like I said, if it's not stopped, it becomes an accepted practice if it happens for long enough, because you establish the precedent that it's not something you prosecute.
Right. Yeah.
So, and if it becomes normal, then what's the next step? Because people act like, oh, well, this is fine right now. It's legal per the BCO. What are you concerned about? Well, the concern is that there's no limiting principle from giving women the ability to perform all the functions of an elder or a deacon, and then just giving them a title outright. Because if they're performing all the functions, why does the title matter? Like, why wouldn't we make them elders, right? Because they're already doing all this stuff, and we already know you don't prosecute churches for basically having this form of functional female headship. That's the goal. Like, we're not like, this isn't some secret network of conspiracists just like putting their hands together like Dr. Evil and twirling a mustache about how they're going to ensure BCO is properly enforced.
Yeah. If there is a secret cabal, they still haven't invited me to it yet, which I don't know what's wrong with me, but
there's never been secret groups in the PCA trying to change things in the court. No, again, it's through the open statement of the truth. I love that. It doesn't have to be a secret thing. Hey, this is what the scripture teaches. This is what our standards clearly direct us toward. And so we want to keep it that way, despite the overwhelming cultural pressure and pragmatic concerns that may arise. It's more important to be faithful to scripture in that way and to be true to the Reformed faith. And so, I think a lot of it has been said. I think a lot of it's being done. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. I've made the point that I don't know that actually there's some kind of, magic bullet overture that as long as we get this wording in the BCO, will change this. Even as we're talking about the data set, part of the reason it's difficult is you have all these different words, all these different ideas, and some of them may just be using language that it's, they just see it as helpful language. It's not necessarily it's not being used to actually describe, functional female officers. And then you clearly have some that are doing that. And some of those cases have been brought up. And so the nature of the BCO is that we're not going to have a book of church order that tells us every single word that you cannot say or use. Then we'll just use other words. Right. But what we already have language that's pretty clear. You're not to use ordained titles for anybody who's not a deacon or an elder. And it doesn't have to just be limited to that. We can actually use that, I think, as the basis to begin working in the direction of, hey, actually, when you say, pastor, but in the English instead of the Latin, it still means the same thing. Even when you use the feminine form, everybody thinks it means the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody hears that and thinks, well, that's totally different. Or in the cases like we've pointed out, hey, when we say deaconess, we just mean, a deacon assistant, like in the BCO. Okay. What about male deacon assistants? Well, we call them deacon assistants. Well, why? Right? Like that's not actually us who's being like nitpicky. You're being confusing at very least. And so I think we have some of those bases, but this is the kind of thing, and the nature of the church is always the kind of thing that it has to be something that we're doing on every level, something that we're working on every level. So yes, General Assembly work, great. Making it known, like we've been talking about, right? Doing live streams, doing spaces, writing about it online, writing about it to your church, talking to people at your church. When people have questions about it, making sure to speak with them about it. I've had lots of good conversations about this. A lot of it, people in my church, men and women, just laughing at it. Like, how crazy is it people would use the term shepherdess? And I mean, it's just,
that's not even the craziest one. There was a case where we found a church who the pastor's wife was described as the first lady.
Oh, wow.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
And out of curiosity, since you are on the leadership page, what exactly is encompassed within the responsibilities of the first lady outside of being assistant to the president of the United States?
She's got a special children's literacy project or something, right? I don't know.
Like Ezers, like an EZER. Like, what is it? Like, this isn't even an English word. What is an Ezer? Did you just mispronounce the word elder? Like, what does that even mean? Like I said, it's just like, it's totally bizarre. And it just points out that the title is, although important, ultimately not the problem here, because on some level it ceased to communicate any meaningful information about the scope of the role to the congregants.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think this is so important. I think that, I want to ask a couple of practical questions. I do think, man, there are just so many paths I kind of want to go down to. But let me start with a question to all of you, because I have you all here tonight and you've given us time, and I want to cut this off relatively soon. So one good question about this is asking people in candidates and credentials, in ordination times, in pastors transferring presbyteries, in these interviews, what are questions that would actually help someone understand someone's view on these issues? What are questions that we could ask someone that would help us get answers to those questions? And that's any of you. Go ahead, Father.
What is the male equivalent to deaconess? Right.
We need a Calvin scholar, I think.
Yeah,
I think that's the problem.
Sure, because Calvin's equivalent to deaconess would be just a female assistant to the deacons, right? Is what he would be meaning by that.
Right.
But so yeah, you'd want what is the male equivalent to a deaconess? If they say a deacon, we'll say, okay, what's the distinctions between a deacon and a deaconess? Right? Is it merely sex, or is there an official difference? Right? If it's a female, the deaconess is just a female deacon. Why is it not an ordained office? Right. So you'll have to ask questions like that. I think a question that the PCA needs to figure out: what is the difference between ordination and commissioning? Like in this context, it's one thing just to select, right?
Yeah.
Select and appoint. But it's a whole other thing to have this entire process that ends with vows and a commissioning. So a lot of times the distinction we make from, like, say, a committee and a commission is a committee research and reports, whereas a commission researches, takes action, and reports on the action they took. Generally, commission, at least in the PCA, means the ability to go accomplish some tasks authoritatively. When you take that idea and combine it with a process leading to an official installation with vows, you're like, what's the difference here? Is this like word games or what? So asking someone, you can do that in the BCO component of the, actually asking what the BCO teaches on these things. Because someone asked on the chat about the Women's and Ministry Report.
Yeah, I was going to bring that one up in a second. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of guys are citing this. It's a terrible report. I'll just be straight out. It's horrendous. It was horrendous back then. I was like, I'm sure I complained about this when this came out, and I did. I went back and typed in, and I found where commissioning just equals female ordination. It's like what I said when this came out. And Kathy Keller was on that in Irwin Ince, which is mind blowing. I don't want to draw any connections. Anyhow, I found a significant amount of women teaching mixed adult Sunday schools. Like, for example, Paige Brown. It's kind of a big deal with the TGC crowd. Keller was a big fan of her, so she was a great Bible teacher, one of the best female Bible teachers out there. I had never heard of her. I wasn't sure about her. So, and I came across her on this one website, West End Community Church, which is a Presbyterian church in Tennessee. She had like her own little page, like, come listen to Paige Brown. I was like, I don't know who this person is. And so she's kind of a local celebrity there. I think she did some news stuff or something. Anyhow, I just went through their Instagram, and there's pictures of a bunch of dudes sitting in there listening to her. Well, I asked a senior member of the PCA about it, and he said, well, she just teaches on hospitality. No, it was James, Romans, theology, right? So I'm about to make a big deal about it, but I thought, oh, before I do this, I should go read that stupid report again. So I read that report. And in it actually commends women teaching. It gives a list of things that they would commend, one of which is women teaching mixed adult Sunday schools. And so something magic happens. Like, I agree, like, just set apart worship. Like we have a, we have a start and end to our worship service. But so women can even, it's like, women can teach or preach almost as long as it's not in the worship service, right? And then now in the worship service, they can do everything but teach and do the words of institution. And talking to Zach Garris, and he reminded me that there have been cases where women have functionally preached on a Sunday and they've been called to account for it, right? So we have seen people that have tried to do that, and thankfully there was discipline for that. I praise God for that. But I would say, man, there's that report. First off, it's just a report. It's not binding. It's not.
We should, everybody, if you're in the PCA, know that these reports, you can, they are, sometimes they'll have, certain actions that they want that people can bring as overtures to make actual changes, but there is no actual like binding constitutional authority with these reports. You can literally read it and be like, that's not good at all, and ignore it. You have every right to do that. Now, the damaging part of it is people do assume a level of authority. A lot of times there's these bigger names attached to them, or more well-known teachers in some way that are connected to them. And so that is the damaging effect of it. But it is important to remember that has no binding authority. That's not the BCO. That doesn't, tell us what we can and can't do. And so even if they said that, we can say, well, that's wrong.
I would just say the slippery slope is a trapdoor, right? And you can go back over the last 7 years. And if you just go into CDM, and I just went ahead and just took screenshots of all the things that mattered in case they deleted it. And I haven't published those online, but I just went ahead and you can see that this issue like really came alive in 2018, has been growing, right? And I think, if anything, what we're tracking that's started, it was in existence first and foremost with the appointing of female deacons by not ordaining the male deacons. So they would call the men and the women deacons, but they wouldn't ordain them, which is a violation of the BCO. This started, one of the most high profile people that did this was Tim Keller, right? And so that's way, I don't know, 15 years ago, whenever that became a big issue. And then with this women in ministry report, things have moved really quick, with the shepherdess and all this stuff, and the elder advisors, the women councils being much more officer like. It's been very quick. So someone asked, should we revisit that? I think it'd be a better way to spend your time than on Christian nationalism, but why not both, right? Like, why can't you, I mean, I think it's a real pressing concern that female ordination has a history of being the Pandora's box that throws a Reformed denomination or Protestant denomination into true liberalism. The Machen sort of liberalism that he was opposing, and so I think we should revisit that. Or people should revisit that. It's a bad report. Is there some good stuff in there? Sure, but on the whole, it's incredibly problematic.
Jesper, what were you going to add to that?
Yeah, I just Michael used a phrase that I just guess was important to comment on. It's like the why not both? Well, we've been encountering online pretty frequently. Why do you care about this functional female ordination so much? Shouldn't you care about all sin? Shouldn't you care about like every problem that the church is encountering? And it's like, why don't you care about XYZ? Like literally, or why don't you care about the EPC or the OPC? And it's just like, okay, well, this sort of tactic, it's a rhetorical trick. And I want people to know that whenever someone does this to you, it's a rhetorical trick because they're trying to pull you away from a tangible objective, something that can be broken down into particulates that are solvable, and yank you and throw you high into the air. You have to reckon with every single problem in the world. And now you can't do everything because now you've been asked by the person to solve everything. And because you're a good person, you think, well, I do care about everything to an extent. But you have to understand it's a trick. You have to be able to rebuke and say, no, it's actually important that we do focus on things, even if we cannot focus on all things all at once, because it's the only way anything gets done.
Yep. I always tell people, yes, I care about everything, just so you know. And then we move on. But I do think, and we will be needing to wrap up here soon. I think one of the other things that Jesper just said is so important, that this is a tangible, achievable thing. This is actually, if you are listening to me in the PCA, this is the time to do something. And this is how we will maintain peace, purity, and unity. It is not, these issues aren't small. They aren't unimportant, right? We've been looking at that, right? We're talking about 9% of churches, potentially more, depending on as we begin to look into this. But that means, I would guess, with at least most ruling elders, most elders, if you're listening and you think this makes sense, you are in a super majority. This is how we maintain the peace and purity. And if someone's worried that, oh, well, it's so bad that you're talking about this online, you know what? I will trade me ever speaking about this online again if I can speak to 300 ruling elders from across the PCA and across presbyteries about this. That's what we want. That's what we need. But this is the best way we have right now, one of the best ways we have to begin to build awareness, to build unity, to build a willingness to act, to take the actions needed. This is unity. This is how we keep good churches and good men from leaving the PCA. This is how we have a church our children can be a part of in the future. This is what we care about. And so I appreciate that word. Michael, do you have anything you want to ask them or add before we leave? Otherwise, we'll let them say if there's any final words they want. Otherwise, we'll hang it up tonight.
No, as I think about, what came in online over the last week or so, since we were publicizing the stream, I feel like we really, touched on everything that I can think of. So this is good. Hey, we're not doing this to attack the PCA. We heart the PCA.
That's right.
We heart it.
I like all good things too. I don't like all bad things.
I mean, for the money, I'm not gonna lie. It's all about the cold hard cash.
Yeah, that's right. The dozens of Elon dollars you can get by mentioning the PCA.
The guy that told me that I was in it for the money also said I need professional help. And I had all these alongside care puns I wanted to say. It's kind of,
yeah,
I resisted.
That's good. That was self-control. That's a positive way to go, man. Jesper, do you have anything you want to add?
Not particularly, but like we've said, this is a growing issue. For those who haven't read the report, we reference a report that was made by two elders, Matthew Lee and Liam Carr, and this was done in 2023. It was deaconesses in the Presbyterian Church of America. This was a random sampling, so it wasn't as extensive as our work. And the problem was smaller then. And this was across multiple denominations. So the PCA, it's refined to a specific denomination, but it's also far more encompassing. And like you said, it's probably more. Look, we did not even touch the foreign churches. The Korean churches make up around 10% of the PCA, and we know that there is a substantial differences in the way they handle female leadership in their churches. It's part of why amendments to deal with this sort of thing in the past haven't passed, because there's a level of ambiguity that takes place within the Korean church regarding female leadership and the titles that they prescribe. So we have to understand this is the point where we have to respond, because eventually it will become a normalcy. And if it becomes a normalcy, it becomes an acceptable and a good. So we have to deal with it now. And I would encourage those of you, if you're listening and you haven't already signed up to savethepca.com/signup, go right ahead. We haven't done any internal communications yet, but they will be coming. We're going to be coordinating on a presbytery level. And then also just keep an eye out on our Twitter feed at Save the PCA. That's where we have basically all the official quote unquote updates. I mean, I obviously post, Michael obviously posts. So yeah, he's clicking on it right now, and you can see it right there. Like all that. We have other social media posts, profiles, but frankly, I have not posted anything on them yet. Yeah. Like I said, I don't really have much else to add, but thank you very much, Matt and Michael, for having Foster and I on. It's much appreciated.
We will be discussing this again next month. Probably not with these guys, though. If big changes come, we enjoy talking to them. We're welcome. They're welcome to come back. We may have issues, may need to just deal with questions like have someone come on and we're going to talk through deaconesses. Why don't we think that's okay? What is the issue with that biblically, historically? We're going to start talking through those issues. When, though I feel so resistant to this idea, someday, yes, we will do an overture show specific to overtures regarding this, and just at least letting people know what they are. And so thank you everyone for joining. We've had 150 people in the live, watching live. And so we know we'll see a lot more people watching later. Please share this with non-online ruling elders so that they can understand the data, right? That's my desire tonight, is to make the data understandable and available to men who God has called and equipped to take appropriate action for the sake of his church. And so we wish you all a good night. Thanks all. We will catch you next time.